Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today's episode is a love story that takes place in the great state of Montana. It's a story of two people who each gave up city life to follow a call to nature to more fully experience their love for the wild, for wildlife, and ultimately for each other. Our guests are Hannah and Mark Ollenburger, creators of Bear's Den Essentials, a knitwear label for those who love being outside where the wild things are. Hannah and Mark are both highly educated and professionally experienced, and they've thoughtfully created their brand that brings together their call to nature, their shared values, and their passion for protecting the natural world. Montana's nickname is the Treasure State, named for its mineral wealth, but the treasure that Hannah and Mark found there is so much more. Hannah, Mark, welcome to the campfire.
So good to be here.
Yes, really good to be here. Yeah.
I'm so excited. We're going to talk a lot about Montana, and Hannah, as we were just talking, you reminded me of a John Steinbeck quote, and I wonder if you could share that. That's a great way for us to kick off this episode.
Yeah, so in his book, Travels with Charlie in Search of America, where Steinbeck is traveling around with his poodle Charlie, he says, "I'm in love with Montana. For other states, I have admiration, respect, recognition, even some affection. But with Montana, it is love." So I was just saying to Mark the other day, we were watching a documentary about our state, and no other place has ever taken my breath away the way that this place does, and so Steinbeck's words ring true.
I love it. That's such a great quote to kick this off. This truly is a love story. So, guys, you were both separately city people that felt this call to nature. Mark from Orange County, California, and Hannah from New York City, and both found yourself just being called to Montana. And I just wondered if we could just start by just each of you guys individually telling us about that calling, like to leave city life and head to Montana.
Yeah, happy to. Mark, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Go for it.
So one thing that's really interesting is we both actually came out to Montana the same year, which was 2013, but we didn't meet each other until a few years later. But I came out on happy coincidence. I have been a huge fan of Jane Goodall my whole life, and I went to a talk by one of her colleagues, Mark Beckoff, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to write my dissertation on. And I had thoughts in my head about it. And he goes, "Oh, you should come out to the West to see, because they're about to delist wolves from the endangered species list. You might want to go and take a look at that." So I came expecting it to be like a 1-week trip. I ended up falling in love with the place so much, and I fell in love with the work, and I completely retooled my plans. And it was the first time in my life I was ever like, I need to make Montana my home. And I have been so fortunate to have been here ever since.
So you fell in love with it. You said you fell in love with the place and with the work. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was so fascinated because I came up pretty much a dyed in the wool greenie. I worked with exotic animals around the world and also locally within the US, from penguins to orangutans. And I I came out to Montana with sort of an assumption about what I was going to find, and like it's a very clear solution about what's the right thing to do. And I met so many folks from ranchers in really rural places and hunters and greenies, and realizing that all of these binary ideas that I had about who people were, first of all, were completely incorrect and oversimplified. And then Big Sky Country is the nickname for Montana, and I just was fascinated. There was one day I was just walking around and I watched a storm front come through, and it was over 75 miles away. And I got to just appreciate that there was this whole like weather pattern happening in front of me that I got to watch unfurl. And living in New York City and living around a bunch of different places, I just didn't get to experience something like that the way, and it spoke to me on such a personal level. And then part of my research was tracking the migratory paths of large carnivores, which was absolutely terrifying to be in grizzly habitat, but at the same time, like, it was so electrifying. And this was happening in a place that could be my backyard, so to speak. And it was so thrilling and so exciting. And I spend so much time studying ideas about like place identity and place attachment, and I was not going to question something that spoke to me on such an emotional level. And I knew I wanted to stay here, and I really wanted to find somebody who I ended up finding, who was Mark, who felt the same way and also wanted to share in appreciating that place with me.
Yeah, and so Mark, I want to come to you. I want to make sure that we just come back to big sky country and what you just talked about, like the vastness of it, as opposed to like especially New York City, where you're pretty tight, and when you're walking around on the sidewalks and you're looking around, you just don't get that big perspective. So I definitely want to come back to that. Mark, how about you? How did that you experience that call to nature from Orange County, California?
Yeah, so mine was a little bit of a different path. Um, so I'm California native. Um, Lived down in Orange County after college, after graduating um, in computer science, and working down there for a few years, and really getting burnout in what I was doing. In the and especially in the city life, a
Mhm.
lot of people, and so I needed something different. I needed a change. And so that really sparked a new career change for me, just to do something different. And without getting too much into the details, I ended up in the oil fields in Bakersfield, California.
Okay.
And that really was a new experience for me. And so I was there for about a year, a little over a year in Bakersfield, and then I got a call saying, "Hey, we need help up in the Bakken field up in North Dakota." And so what turned out was supposed to be a 3-month stint of them borrowing me up there in the oil fields was really turned into something. Hey, can you transfer up here? We really need you up here. It's growing fast. And um, I knew right was the right thing, because I wanted to get out of California. I wanted to experience something different. And in California, I always gravitated towards the mountains. I lived in Huntington Beach, Newport Beach for a period of time, but I always gravitated. And that was just, and thanks to my parents who instilled in us the outdoors. And so getting out of California into a place like North Dakota wasn't, like, for me to live there wasn't the most exciting place, but I knew there was something around there that was calling for me. And so I was on a rig break, a break from the rig. We were doing a rig move, actually, which is probably about a week and a half.
Mhm.
And so I took that break for a road trip, and I went through Montana. And I started out on the High Line, went all the way across the north through Glacier, and then kind of did a U-turn through Missoula, and then ended up in Bozeman. And I knew at that point that was the right place for me, because I had done some fly fishing in California, and I had heard that that area was the fly fishing capital of the United States. And and so it was just, I knew it. That was the place. So
One thing that I think it's worth just mentioning, a lot of times when we think about nature, we just think about these beautiful places, right? These beautiful serene. Orange County, California is beautiful, right? So I
Yeah.
guess I just like if it's not just beauty, right? Because Orange County is beautiful.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
what
yeah.
so I'm just
It, I,
curious if you can like what else is there there's another element, right?
it's the I think it's the being in such a big place, that's so expansive.
Mm,
Mhm.
And there's animals that you don't see anywhere else. I mean, you see them in some places in other states, but they're more prevalent in Montana. And just being in an area where there's more land and there's more animals than there are people it's just
I love that.
it's an attraction,
Yeah.
to that environment. So
It's truly more I mean, like the cities
Wow.
are developed, right? It's wild. Like exactly. Exactly. So I
Yeah.
love
yeah.
that. So my sense, correct me here if my sense is, Mark, you kind of were like given an opportunity to go there and you were excited about it. Hannah, it seemed, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like yours was more discretionary, a choice.
It was totally I it was a place that was not on my radar at all, but I was always open. Like I've lived places where I was really excited about the work, but I wasn't excited about where I lived, and I am not a Southern Belle, for example. Like it was it was such a good experience to have that. And so I try to remain like open to the possibilities of things, but it just literally never occurred to me. It was very much on a practical level, like, oh, I get to be a part and learn about this really interesting conversation happening, and I'll get to see some animals in the process. But I think part of that was coming from the place where I just assumed I would always want to move around my whole life because that's always the experience that I've had. And so it was I'm grateful to my younger self for being open to that and for just embracing it because it was not what I expected. I think Mark's family too, there was like, "So Montana," and now they're all on board and they come out. We last year we got married in February when it was -20, and so they really are like, "Wow, you must really love this place."
That's
And
commitment.
it's true. We are committed. So,
Yeah, I love this so much. So, I wanna get into how you guys met. I think before that part comes, I'm curious, like coming for both of you, coming from cities, was there like a romanticized version of it in your minds, like going there, and how did reality match up with that expectation? Mark, let's go to you first.
Yeah, I for me it was I think it comes back to growing up and going to national parks,
Mhm.
with my parents on camping trips, or taking our tent trailer on a road trip to Zion, or to the Grand Canyon, or wherever it was. But we had never gone to Glacier. and and so for me it was just like this it was this state that it was unknown to me. There was a something that needed to be explored for myself, because I feel like I've explored almost every other state but that one.
Mm.
And so there was this, like, the unknown part of it, and like ness of the was that's what drew me to Montana. It wasn't a question whether I was going to live in North Dakota. It was always like to be Montana, but I wasn't sure where in Montana.
yeah.
So
And Hannah, how about you?
I think I was almost overly cavalier about not really considering what I was walking into. I just didn't that's the only piece of this that I almost regret, is that I didn't even know what I was about to get to experience. I flew into Jackson, and you're kinda sitting there, and then you fly in past the
Mhm.
Tetons, you're like, "Where am I? Like, what what am I doing?" In the best kind of way, and then we went up through the park into and came to Bozeman, and I was like, "Holy smokes." Like, I was I didn't know what I was missing out on, and I was a beach baby, so I was always raised out on the ocean, and so I still have a huge amount of respect and appreciation for the sea, but I developed my love of the mountains as an adult, and it's it's interesting that I just was almost, like, naively not considering where I was going, and I admit that that's true.
So not really having expectations then, you show up
No.
and what did you find when you got there?
Well, it's interesting because the first day that I showed up, I had to go to a meeting at Wyoming Game and Fish about the wolf delisting, and it was in an old saloon. And I just walk in not knowing any of the dynamics. There's the Game and Fish folks in their red shirts, and then there's the ranchers and the outfitters in different parts of the room, and then there's the greenies. And again, I later learned that those were gross oversimplifications, but that was what my little mind at the time, or my unsophisticated mind at the time, could process. So I start talking to everybody in sort of the bold way that I tend to do, of like, "Oh, how's your day going so far? What do you think this meeting's gonna be about?" And you see people kind of being like, "Who are you?" And I've since learned to, like, reel in my, I don't consider myself an extrovert, but I consider myself outgoing, and I was sort of overwhelming folks, not realizing what was about to take place, and then watching the conversation happen. I then spent the rest I stayed up really late looking up all of these terminologies and these different things about what was happening, so then it completely reshaped how I went about the rest of my research time, because I was like, "Oh, I did not appreciate where I was or what was happening or the significance of the wolf reintroduction even." So, it was definitely baptism by fire, but in a good way.
Yeah, I love it. So just for listeners, so Mark, you made your way to Montana through the work opportunity in the oil business. Hannah, if you could you just for listeners, because you've mentioned a little bit about like, walking into the saloon and some of the work that you were doing, like contextually, what was the work that you were brought to Montana to do?
Yeah, so my PhD is in environmental psychology, which is looking at basically people and places and people. So it takes into account the natural world as a fixture of something that impacts how you behave, how you think, how you relate to other people, on top of that social psychology that's and some of the more well-known branches, industrial psych. So it's this way of integrating how the places that you are shaped by throughout your life also are really infused in how you go about the world. And so I was really interested. I came up as an animal behaviorist, so I used to study animal behavior, and I switched gears because I realized in order to affect meaningful conservation outcomes on the ground, you have to take into account human behavior. So I really wanted to understand why the wolf conflicts were so deeply divided. Like, what were the social factors? What were the environmental factors? What were some of the political factors? Because my goal has always been to help find those levers, knowing how human behavior, like how humans operate, how the psyche operates, in order to help overcome those very oversimplifications, like the categories I mentioned, in order to actually like share the landscape on the ground with each other and also the wildlife. So my dissertation was on the conflicts of coexistence with carnivores, and my subsequent work was about how to overcome them.
Yes. Super interesting work. And it's, you guys have a love for nature and being in it and working in it, but you also, you guys are highly academic and also bring incredibly strong minds to that work as well. So that's very cool. All right. So you guys separately come to Montana, you feel this call to nature, and somehow, some way, the two of you guys come together. How does that happen?
Mhm.
Do you want to tell the story, Mark? I think you should.
So we both moved to Bozeman in 2013, and then it wasn't till 2019 August we were both on a dating app and online, and we came across our profiles and we set a meeting at a coffee house, and that was it for me.
And that's how it's done in Montana.
That's how
Yeah.
it's done.
Yeah, it was it for me too. Especially on our second date, I met his dog, and the two of them talk about love. It's yeah.
So you guys created a business together.
Hmm.
And we're going to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that. But so much of this business is a reflection of the people that you have brought into this relationship, the people that you've brought into this state. And you talked a lot before this call. You've talked to me a lot about these shared values that you guys have. So
Yeah.
before we get into the business, can we talk a little bit about those shared values that ultimately lead to this business that we're going to talk about?
Yes. I'm trying to think about the best way. Do you have a thoughts that you want to jump in with, Mark, or
So I think what we both brought to the table was, I think, first of all, our just love for people, animals, um, nature. You know, we were both on the same page when it came to um, the love for, you know, the outdoors and animals, and, you know, the people around us. And we both grew up in religious, you know, backgrounds, and so we brought some of those values to the table as well. And so, you know, right away we had things in common that really you know, brought us together, and it made that attraction even more quickly, right?
yeah. Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it, Mark. I loved Mark right away because he's always been so grounded. And I think there's always been that balance that we've had with one another too, but that we each know how to bring each other up and kind of keep each other settled in so many ways. But what was such a standout to me is like neither of us are partiers, neither of us need to kind of see and be seen. We're just people who really feel so blessed to live where we do, to get to play where we do, and to get to go out and experience these wild places. I mean, after we get over the stranger danger of our first date, you always meet in a coffee shop or a public place first, and that was another sign that Mark was a really good keeper because when I suggested or he suggested we meet, he's like, "How about a tea house or a coffee house?" And then he started then it was totally fine to go out in the woods with him. But I appreciated just that, that consideration and that consideration that he has always extended into the natural world. We don't recreate in places that are like he won't go mountain biking if the trail is blown out. I won't go out on a trail if there's grizzly sign because I don't want to create a conflict that we don't need to create.
Mm.
And when I met him, I was actually in the middle of the field work for my book. And so I would tell him about these interviews that I'd be on, and we'd brainstorm all of these ideas. And a lot of those relationships that we were had been cultivating over the past this 5 years or 6 years before we met one another, when the pandemic hit, and really our only options were to go out to really remote areas to go backpacking or hiking and to knit, which we both love doing, it started to help inform what kind of a business we wanted to run, on top of also nourishing the relationship we were cultivating at the time too.
Yeah. So, you did move from the coffee shops and the tea houses into the outdoors, and you guys have recreated together. But a little bit of that, like, what are some of the things that you guys love doing in Montana that kind of brought this all together into the business that you created?
So after the first date, we went on a couple dates, and at that point it was okay, we need to get out into the outdoors. And so we had planned a day hike up to Sacagawea Peak
The
and
tallest
the
peak in Galvin
Bridgers,
County.
Cool.
and so which is it's probably, to get there it's probably an hour
Yeah.
outside of Bozeman, but that's just because it's a dirt road that takes a while to get down, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, as the crow flies, it's not too far from Bozeman, but it takes a while to get there. So in a sense, it's kind of remote because not too many people go up there, and so that was the true test. And could we both be out in the outdoors and hiking, and it wasn't a question. It was just whether, it was gonna we were gonna have fun doing it.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
because the first 2 dates, we had a blast. And, for me, I knew this was right. Everything was just it was right on. Everything about Hannah, I loved everything about her. And so, like, for me to continue, like, it was a no-brainer. But to make sure she was on the same page. So I think was kind of that test for me. Like, if she could do that hike, then oh, this is meant to be. So
It was a test. What do you think? What do you think, Hannah?
oh,
It was I mean, it was the easiest and most fun test I've ever taken for sure. So, yeah.
I love it. So this thing all starts to come together, and in time, Bears Den Essentials comes to be. Can
Yeah.
you tell us about Bears Den Essentials? What is it? And then we can get into how it happened.
Yeah, so it is our joint knitting business. So we sell finished knits, and we also make patterns, and we try to use yarn that is either local from Montana or made it or wool that was grown, spun, knit or not knit, but knit by us in the USA. And so we sell finished knits and we also do patterns. And the story of how it came to be is largely credited to Mark because I had been knitting since I was like 6. And speaking of like tests, usually like I feel like knitting is often seen as this sort of feminine activity, even though historically men actually were originally knitters as well, too, especially to make like fishing nets and such. And right away, Mark was like, "That's really cool. Can you teach me how to do it?" I was like, I knew I already had adored him at this point, but it was like, "Oh, I get to share this activity that I love with him too." And so I taught him, and he was phenomenal at it. Like, when I say phenomenal, I'm not lying when I say I've never seen somebody pick it up as fast as he did, and I knew he was gonna be good at it because of his software engineering brain. What I didn't expect was just how amazing he is at designing patterns and coming up with all of these great colorways for us, and, I wanna pass it to him to just talk about his ideas about the business and and how that ties in with, like, the pandemic, and I was in the middle of writing a book. It was a weird time.
yeah, yeah, it was. So when I learned early on, probably within the first few days of meeting Hannah, that she loved to knit. And I had been wanting to, at that point, for probably at least 10 years, wanting to learn how to make a hat, a knitted hat.
Nice.
But I just never got around to it. I never taught myself. And and then, I met Hannah, and it was just like I knew I was waiting for something. And and so she immediately taught me, and I made a scarf for the first time. And I had a few glitches on it, and but that was like, I loved it. It was relaxing. For me, it was like it was a way to shut my mind off. being a technical person and writing code, you can get really deep into different ideas or
Mhm.
different thoughts, and so for me to unwind, it's just relaxing, watching some television, or laying on the couch, or but if I can knit and do something mindless, and just take those thoughts wherever they go, and travel in my own mind, while knitting, then that's a win-win. And so that's what it was for me. It was a way to relax, and then before you know it, we have and so my second thing was a hat. The second thing I
Yeah.
made was a hat, and it turned out really well. I was surprised.
It was so good. It was
Yeah.
so good. I was so I was like, "I don't want him to get discouraged
Mhm.
because I'm glad that he likes it." And he was like, "No, I wanna do it." I was like, "Okay."
Yeah, and so that hat turned into another one, and another one, and we were both making hats, and all of a sudden we have 20, 30 hats around, and we're like, okay, we have all these hats, we're probably not going to wear them all. So what do we do now? And Hannah mentioned, if I can remember correctly, she's like, I've been wanting to knit as a business, you
Yeah.
know, for a long time, and I was like, well, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's sell these hats. Let's
Well,
do
so
whatever we have to do.
what
Yeah.
what I what I love about this is that, when we were first talking, and I was hearing about how you guys came to Montana and your love for the wild, your love for the wilderness and just being outdoors, and learning more, Hannah, about what you're doing with, the conflict reduction. And I didn't totally understand like the connection, but as I've gotten to know you and actually got a chance to read your book, like it makes so much more sense now. And I just wonder if you could talk about like actually the central product that you use in knitting, which is wool. And I
Yeah.
wonder how, like, if you could talk about how wool like brings a lot of this work that you guys have done together into this
Yeah.
business that you guys have. Yeah.
I wanna think about how to articulately answer that. Just I I had knit as somebody who I had been a person who knit with wool and appreciated the end product. And then I did all this field work exploring how to increase the use of non-lethal tools for sharing the landscape with large carnivores on ranches. So inevitably I started to get to know ranchers more, and I learned more about like all the steps of the process, and I saw what so many regeneratively minded ranchers were doing to make sure that they were encouraging carbon drawdown, so carbon sequestration for climate change mitigation, the ways in which they were trying to use wool for reducing a lot of the issues that fast fashion creates, because fashion, like, unfortunately, apparel, especially fast fashion, I think is the second greatest polluter after fossil fuels. So I learned about this like I learned even more about something that I had been working with my whole life, but I didn't fully appreciate all of the steps in the process. And both Mark and I got and Mark has family in the ranching business. And so he understands it, but we both got to develop this appreciation for the work that goes into it, the implications for what ranchers like offer ecologically, not just for like the fashion and the textile supply chains, but also for carnivores, which was what brought me out here in the first place. And so instead of seeing and learning about sheep as something that like was always in conflict with wildlife, I learned about these ranchers who are actually ranching in harmony with the landscape, and understanding what that looked like was really inspiring to us, because we're like, oh, we can source our wool from people like this, but also we can give back to people doing the work that we really believe in. So we got to start a business that gives back. Like, a lot of our hats that we offer give back to different nonprofits around the area that increase the use of, I purposely don't use the word coexistence. Happy to talk more about that, but it's no secret that that's a very loaded word. So increase shared landscapes with wildlife. So we were getting to build a business around this product of wool. And I mean, wool is such a wonder material because it's something that can keep you both warmer and cooler depending on the climate. It's really hygienic, and there's so many different uses for it, be it clothing, or you can use it for stabilizing the sides of the road so that it doesn't get torn up when you have a lot of traffic or when you get the snow coming through that can kind of churn up the sides and create all of this erosion issue. So it is so amazing, and we got to use this material to, like, effectively live our values, but we get to have so much fun
Yeah.
designing it too, so with it, so
Well, so it was so interesting for me again, like in reading in your book, and maybe we can talk about that for a minute, but just like really just kind of this whole, it's almost like the supply, I'm going to call it the supply chain for lack of a better word, but in Montana from, sheep as livestock
mhm.
to the making of the yarn to now you're using this, and it's just this like holistic process that you guys are taking advantage of inside of this world that you guys are so connected to. And it is such a sustainable, environmentally friendly thing that you guys are doing. And it totally makes sense to me why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, it's really exciting to us too, because I think we we really also wanna support the people who are ensuring that work on the ground. Like, there's so many good people doing, I mean, I love Montana for the wild and the wildlife, but I love the people. My favorite person is in the other room on this call with you, but there's so many good people, and that's what kept me in Montana as well. Like, there are a lot of divisive issues that I think are fracturing a lot of elements of our nation. The thing that I've always appreciated about Montana is if you're on a dirt road, the assumption is you give the two-finger hello. Don't do the full wave because that's a little overexcited, but you say hi, and if you have a flat tire, someone's gonna pull over and help you, and I think there's that sense of responsibility and camaraderie that I've really come to appreciate, and you see that in these people that we connect to with our business, and we love supporting them. Sorry, Mark, I've been talking a lot. So
Yeah, it's such a, I think, we're lucky to be in a position where we're at, and to have a business that uses wool from Montana and other parts of the country as well, but to be able to use it from our state here, um, is really special because, as Hannah said, with a lot of these ranchers, and she's developed these relationships, and it's really cool to take that beyond just what that work, that book was all about. Now it's with our business, and we can extend those relationships through the business, and even give back to what they're doing. That's been the special part.
Yeah, I love that. So for people listening, how can they find out more about the business? How can they buy products?
yeah. So you can find us online. Our company is Bears Den Essentials, and our website is just bearsdenessentials.com. If you're a fellow knitter, we have patterns on Ravelry and Etsy as well. And we offer some YouTube tutorials here and there on our channel. So all Bears Den Essentials and on Instagram.
Very cool. And so how are things going with the business so far?
They've been good.
Hannah?
They've been really f I mean, it's the busy time of year for us with Christmas and Hanukkah orders, so holiday orders tend to start picking up steam as early as September, so in August, we start stocking up on all the yarn and building surplus inventory, and the busy season runs through between mid-February and mid-March, and so summertime is really fun for us to get creative with patterns, to do some of our bulk orders in advance, so we like to do, and we're trying to get into more and more stores as well around the region, but eventually we'd like to do kind of a road trip of the US to get it into a lot of different places. So, excuse me. So to get it into a lot of different places, we like to make sure all of our stuff has very naturey colors to it or animal themes. So really geared towards outdoorsy folks.
Love it. Well, I wonder if we could, as we kind of wrap up here, I want to touch on so you've written a book, Hannah, and I wonder if we could just touch on that a little bit. You guys both came from a city life, from a city
Mhm.
landscape into this big sky country with this vast landscape where we have wildlife, but you've also expressed like a love for people. So you guys, the both of you have this shared love for both people and wildlife. And Hannah, this book and this work that you've done is about ultimately it's about the conflict. And maybe I'm not going to paraphrase, but I'm going to let you do it. But ultimately about the conflict that happens between the people, their livelihood that's built into ranching, and the wildlife that potentially invades on that livelihood.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could just touch on that because it plays into sheep as livestock, which
Mhm.
ultimately grows the wool that is used for the hats. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's this whole interconnectedness.
Yeah, it's the one thing I always stay away from whenever I talk about this is talking about, like, who belongs on the landscape, because I always think that's a very dangerously misguided approach, whether that is talking about people or wildlife, but the reality is that first of all, conflict is an inherent part of being alive, even for non-human animals, and us human animals who have these handy prefrontal cortexes that we sometimes forget to use, we have this both like challenge and responsibility of thinking about how to mediate really difficult conflicts, both with with one another, so other people, but also the wildlife. And so I've always really, as I mentioned, I used to be really into working directly with animals. I wanted to be Jane Goodall when I was growing up. I'm still waiting to grow up, but I know I'm not gonna be the next Jane Goodall, but I'm Hannah. And I was really interested in the human piece because I do think the reality is that there are these ranchers on the landscape. They play a critical role in our economy, in our food systems, and there's all of this the complexity of what it means to be a rancher in the 21st century. And what I was seeing when I was doing my dissertation field work was a number of ranchers who were really taking on this responsibility of like not only like, tolerating these animals, but making it taking it a next step further to actually think about how to share the landscape in a way that doesn't just allow them to continue doing their job, but also actually makes the landscape even better for themselves and the natural world. And I was absolutely fascinated by that because it's not like they're getting paid in spades to go and do that. And so for me, the question that drove this work was like, I know what drives me, what drives these people, and I was fascinated by these intrinsic values of folks that, like, it is my responsibility to be a steward of the land, and I don't necessarily like wolves or grizzly bears, or some folks do, but I recognize that it's my responsibility to use all of the tools in the toolkit. That was the expression that I always heard was, "I'm gonna use all the tools in the toolkit to share the landscapes with these animals," and for me, I think the challenge with a lot of the environmental work, and my advisor in grad school wrote a paper about this, is that it's very doom and gloom. So it's apocalyptic environmentalism was the expression she used. And I found so much hope and promise in these people who are all like, they all admit that they are imperfect individuals, not doing everything perfectly, but they're always willing to try creative things and to see what they can do to make it a little bit better. And it's that, like, growth mindset that was so inspiring to me, and it gave me so much hope about the ability to actually address some of our challenges. We live in a place that's just north of where the grizzly bears are in the gravelly mountains, and so much of that natural repopulation that's happening, which admittedly has a lot of it's still conflict laden interpersonally, but that's happening because of the fact that there are all of these collaborative problem solving efforts happening on the ground and many of which are landowner led. And so it just blew me out of the water to see that happening. And again, it goes back to like this love story. Like, I get so passionate about these people. I get so passionate about where we live and the work that we do because it gives me so much hope and it gives me so much energy. And then I get to share that with the person that I love who is also deriving energy from it as well. So it's this book is sort of an imperfect set of stories about how to find hope and how to move forward in a way that I think other people, my hope is that they can enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah. And I read it. I had a chance to read it, and I think my like one of my big takeaways it was really really interesting. Um Very academic, somewhat over my somewhat over my head, but very like just very very interesting. And I think like for me, um I think that there is in some way like this idea that man and nature are separate, right? Like man versus nature, or man against nature. And the reality is like we are nature. Humans
Yeah.
are part of nature,
Yeah.
right? And so I think but what you were saying like before we got started here was that conflict is inherent in it's just a part of nature.
It is. And it doesn't, and the thing I appreciate that you said is not many people consciously like conflict. And I'm one of those folks too. But I think it's, as you said, the sooner you lean into it to negotiate it, the sooner you get to get out of it and get back to the good stuff. And so I see these ranchers who are using all the tools in the toolkit in partnership with really great folks trying to support them and ultimately the land and the wildlife they share it with and the livestock too. They're leaning into that conflict and helping people experience the suite of emotions that are really, really uncomfortable and scary because the changing nature of how we value food producers is very conceptually scary, and symbolically wolves and other carnivores have a lot of meaning to them. So to kind of lean into that conflict and go through it, there's the Winston Churchill quote, like, "If you're going through hell, keep going." And it's not that it's hell by any stretch of the imagination, but it's uncomfortable, and they're moving forward through it, which in a way is the best way to make that conflict so much less painful.
I love it. I love the work that the two of you guys are doing, and I love how you've brought it together in this knitting business, Bears Den Essentials. You guys have answered the call to adventure. You started off in the city, and you have answered the call to adventure. And I'm just curious for both of you if you could offer some advice to anybody else that maybe has felt that call to adventure but hasn't yet acted as you guys did to answer that call. So, Mark, how about you?
I think I have a lot of friends in California that said, "Hey, Mark, you did it. You went out and you followed your dreams." And to me, it was a no-brainer, and but a lot of people don't think that way. A lot of people don't take that first step. And my advice is just take that first step and see where it takes you, because you're going to be surprised and you're going to probably love it. So it makes me really emotional
Yeah,
thinking
me
about
too.
it.
Yeah.
And so, but it's such a like just take the step. That's that's all I can say.
Take the step. Hannah, how about you?
Um, I I'm gonna get emotional too thinking about it. Like, somebody once asked me why I cared so much about animals and pursuing the kind of work that I did and the values I had. And my response to them, however, like kind of a little bit big for my britches that it was at the time when I said it, was that I just think the world's more interesting when I'm not the only one in it. And I am an only child who grew up with dogs, but also hung out by myself a lot. And so I think I have really come to appreciate just the nourishment that animals and nature can really offer a person's soul, but also like for me, I think it's so worth it because it's also opened me up to people, not like my husband, my friends, my community that I have. Like you talk about 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon in Montana, it's more like two, and you typically know a friend of a friend, and I really just appreciate that. And I think if you don't take, as Mark said, if you don't take that first step and follow your beliefs, like you miss out on all of these really rich experiences that you might not have experienced before. And I think as scary and uncomfortable as it can be, it's also really rich and fulfilling. And I wouldn't trade it for the world.
This is a love story. It's a love story about you guys, your love for Montana, the wildlife, and we all know that Hollywood loves a love story. And so what I want to know is when Hollywood picks up on this love story and they decide to make a movie about you guys, I want to know who are going to be the actors that are going to play you guys in this movie.
There's two that come to mind. One, the reason I pick her is because she's a fellow millennial who can take herself pretty seriously at times, but is also, like, surprisingly, like, really silly and fun to listen to in interviews, and that's Anne Hathaway, so,
Nice.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anne
Nice.
Hathaway.
Uh-huh.
Love it. Mark?
There's a number of actors that I've been told I look a lot like, but I would have to say the most I got was for Matt Damon. I would have to go
Ooh, this is
with
going to
Matt
be a
Damon.
good cast, you guys. What's this movie going to be
Yeah.
called?
With Montana, it is love.
With Montana, It Is Love, starring Anne.
Yeah, from the quote.
Yeah, love it. With Montana, It Is Love, starring Anne Hathaway and Matt Damon. It's going to be an Oscar winner. I love it. It's going to be fantastic. You guys, thank you so much for spending some time here with me today. I really appreciated hearing your story, learning about Bears Den Essentials, and people definitely need to check it out. Go to the website, buy some wool. It is environmentally friendly. It's comfortable. And yeah, thank you guys so much. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope that Hannah and Mark's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Hannah, Mark, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott.